This is the lecture for European history for Wednesday, the 6th of April 2022. Last time we talked about Russia basically collapsing under the weight of the war. So what happens when you have a mostly agrarian nation trying to fight an industrial war? Russia simply was not up to the strain in 1914 through 1917. And the society falls apart. Now we shift to the wider world. Okay, first off, the seeds of decolonization, which is something that happens in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s as a result of the world wars, are sown in World War I. Before World War I, the Europeans who conquer Africa and parts of Asia are the only industrial society in the world, the only people who understand how industrial society works and how modern warfare is fought. But the French bring black troops in from Africa. So do the British. They bring in the King's African Rifles, or people trained. But the French particularly bring a lot of troops from the colonies in Africa and some in Asia. The British bring a lot of people from India. And they fight alongside the white colonies of Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, and Britain itself. And what happens when these troops who come from societies that have been conquered by Europe, because they're primitive compared to Europe, is the mystique that Europeans had of being more advanced, more wise, of being worthy of the leadership of the world, that goes away. At least it begins to go away. Before World War I, the thought of India approaching independence was a pipe dream. But World War I, as much or more than Mahatma Gandhi, is ultimately responsible for cracking Britain's control, not destroying it yet, but fracturing it, weakening it critically. And the same thing is true in Africa. When people who have fought against Germans come back home to the colonies, they're not content to be treated like savages anymore. Nor are they as willing to be pupils of Western civilization. One of the great what-ifs of the world, had the First World War not been fought, is what would have happened if the European empires had had a few more decades to try to civilize, by European standards, those primitive peoples of Africa and Asia. Well, we don't know, because they didn't. Instead, independence came as a result of an exhausted Europe, physically, morally, materially exhausted Europe. But had World War I not have been fought, is it possible that some genuine fusion of cultures between Europeans and natives, a confederation of hybrids, could have grown up around the world? Well, it's possible, but it didn't happen that way. There was even a mutual agreement among the colonial powers, both before and after World War I, that within the vast majority of sub-Saharan Africa, neither guns nor booze was to be sold to the natives. Because the feeling was that if you arm the natives with guns and you unlock their restraint with booze, you'll end up with a lot more revolution. So I don't feel the need to go hugely into this, except to say that the mystique of European superiority is cracked, tarnished, sullied by the Great War. Because really, what the native troops from Africa and Asia observe is that Europeans are not in control. The Europeans are just like them, human beings, beset by a world that is beyond their power. because if you want to talk about desperation, the natives saw European desperation in the trenches on the Western Front in World War I. Now we come to the Ottoman Empire, which used to stretch all the way to Morocco in North Africa. But in the late 1800s, the rest of North Africa was taken away from it. And even Egypt was taken away from it by the British in all practical terms. So at the beginning of the Great War, the Ottoman Empire includes Turkey and Europe, this little area here, and of course Constantinople, right here. It includes Anatolia, this area here, which in ancient times was called Asia Minor, and Syria and Palestine or Judea, the Sinai Peninsula, the Hejaz, which is the western area of Arabia, where Mecca and Medina are. It does not include the great center of Arabia's desert, but it includes the Gulf states, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, and up back into Turkey. So it's still basically controlling the Middle East. And the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Sultan is the Turkish word for emperor, is considered to be the Caliph. Now, Caliph is an Islamic term for someone who has a particular role. C-A-L-I-P-H, Caliph. The Caliph is Islam's chief ruler on earth. Not the overlord of all Muslims, but the defender of Islam. That's the Caliph. And obviously, Muhammad was both prophet, but his descendants were Caliph. And in the Middle Ages, the Umayyad Caliphate were the descendants of Muhammad, and then the Abbasid Caliphate took over in Iraq, and they were the chief Muslims, protectors of Islam. And then the Turks came, the Seljuks for a while, and then the Ottoman Turks. For the last 500 years, from the 1400s until the early 1900s, the Ottoman Turks were the Caliph. The Ottoman Sultans were also Caliph. They were the protectors and defenders of Islam. And they had sided with the Germans over the battle cruiser Goeben. And for a number of other reasons. So, what to do? Well, the Turks, the Ottoman Turks, the rulers of the Ottoman Empire, decide that they think that Britain's hold on the Suez Canal in Egypt is weaker than it seems. So they launch attacks across the canal that completely fail. They are humiliated. But the fact that the Ottomans are hostile threatens Russia from the south. I actually drew that border too far south. Because the Russians at this time control the Caucasus, which is the region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And the Ottomans might attack northward into Russia, which actually they're going to be prepared to do. So in 1915, the leaders of the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan's the figurehead by this point, a group of young officers called the Young Turks have taken over the Ottoman Empire. The Young Turks' leader, Enver Pasha, moves an army eastward across Anatolia and through Armenia towards the Caucasus. But Enver Pasha is concerned. He is concerned because Armenia, basically here, and it's a little farther, too. Armenians are Christians. In fact, they're among the world's first countries to become Christian, if not the first country. I think Ethiopia is the first place to have an organized Christian church, but it's possible that the first kingdom on earth to become Christian was Armenia. And the Ottoman Turks are Muslims, and they're going to fight the Russian Orthodox Christians So, what to do? What to do? We're moving an army through Armenia. We're going to have the Armenians on our flanks. They're Christians. Can't trust them. We don't like the Armenians anyway. They've been around since ancient times. They're like a stone in the shoe of every empire in that region. They're like the Kurds today. And Enver is a man of action. Enver Pasha, the leader of the Ottoman army, moving through Armenia towards Russia. So he decides to settle things by launching the 20th century's first genocide, the Armenian Genocide. Note this down. It's not in your notes. It should be. The Armenian Genocide of 1915. This is done by the Ottoman Turks. Armenian, Armenian, Genocide, Genocide, 1915. Now, we're going to talk a lot about this word genocide when we do the Second World War and the Holocaust, final solution to the Jewish question. But genocide is a new term. It's a modern term. There's homicide. What's homicide? What does the word mean?
Murdering.
Murdering. What?
A person.
A human being. Homo sapiens sapien. That's us. Homo means man. Side means murder. So homicide is the murder of a human being. Genocide. What's the word beside? Yeah.
Would that be like a race?
Yeah, a race or a group of people. Genus. It's the same thing that you use in biology. There's genus and species. So genocide is the attempted murder of an entire race of people, which is exactly what the Turks try to do. They engage in a thoroughgoing, months-long mass murder of every man, woman, and child that they can find. To this day, the Turkish government denies the Armenian genocide, despite overwhelming evidence. And they pout and scold anyone who talks to them about the Armenian genocide, denying that it happened. Oh, it's just Russian propaganda, or it's just Christian propaganda, or it's just Western propaganda. Oh, no. We're manly men, we Turks. We're not going to wipe out women and children who aren't doing anything to us at all other than existing, which is really what they did. The crime of the Armenians wasn't anything that they had done. The crime of the Armenians was to be on an invasion route, which they'd been really throughout their entire history, and to be Armenian Christians. The Turks just didn't trust them. So on their way to attack the Russian Caucasus, the Turks commit genocide. First of the 20th century, starting a pattern. Now, the British Navy has begun to convert their dreadnought battleships and battlecruisers from coal power, which is somewhat efficient, to oil power, which is much more efficient. I have talked to environmentalists who say, why do we use oil? Why? What is it about oil? Are we addicted to oil? They equate it to being addicted to drugs. Oil is very efficient. It burns so well. And you don't have to dig it like coal or shovel it like coal. There's no coal dust. You get a volume, you get a cubic inch of oil and a cubic inch of even the best coal, and the oil is going to be much more efficient in terms of creating heat, which is the source of energy. So coal-driven British warships operate in the 20 to 25 or 26 knot range. Knots are speeds of ships. Oil warships operate in the 24 to 30 knot range. And it's much more efficient to refuel an oil-driven warship. You just attach the fuel lines and pump it. Whereas coaling requires your entire crew to basically get into their dirtiest clothes and shovel coal from the collier to your coal bunkers by hand. So because the Royal Navy, which the British are kind of depending upon to keep the Germans blockaded and to protect the islands, is increasingly dependent upon oil, and because most of Britain's oil comes from Persia, what's today Iran, they feel a need to do something about the Ottoman Empire because the Ottoman Empire also has a bunch of oil, and the Ottoman Empire is possibly going to threaten Britain's source of oil. So, where to attack? Well, Churchill comes up with an idea, as do a few others in the East. What we should do is we should send naval forces through what are called the Dardanelles. These are the straits between the Gallipoli Peninsula and Asia. And then through the Sea of Marmara, and we land at Constantinople and take the place. What the Turks call Istanbul, we call Constantinople. There's a song about it. However, what this is really going to require is surprise. We've got to get ships and men, send them out, probably from Egypt, maybe elsewhere, French and British forces, sneak them through the Aegean, and simultaneously land troops on the Gallipoli Peninsula and sail battleships up the Dardanelles towards Constantinople. But some people in the Navy say, we don't need the army. We can do it ourselves. And political pressure is put, and Churchill is forced to agree against his better judgment. And the Navy, the British Mediterranean Fleet and the French Navy, try forcing the Dardanelles with warships against landward forts. The Turks realize something. There's a current at the surface of the water here, from the Black Sea to the Aegean Sea, a strong current. It's like a river. And the warships are going up against that current, which is no big deal. They're modern warships, coal-powered for the most part. They're not going to have any trouble. But the Turks discovered, if you guys are upstream of those guys, and they're causing a problem by sending ships towards you, all you have to do is drop maritime mines into the water, and they'll just float down the current. And maybe they'll see the mines, and maybe they won't. And then, boom! And that's what the Turks do. The Turks also discovered that their earthenwork defenses for their artillery are actually much better than anyone thought, and that the British and French battleships that are going against them have real trouble knocking the land forts out. So the combination of the mines and the Turkish forts caused failure. Failure! Emotional damage. So, sorry, funny YouTube videos. Okay, you obviously know who I'm talking about. That's good. It's hilarious. So, the Navy leaves. But it's not like the plan is abandoned. No. 6 months later, the British and French come back, but this time with a bunch of Australian and New Zealand troops. 6 months later, 6 months after telegraphing their move, and they land troops on the Gallipoli Peninsula. But the thing about the Turks, the thing you need to really understand is they may be violent and even obnoxious, but they're good at war. And since the British and French have already indicated that they probably are going to come back, what they've been doing for the 6 months since the naval attack is fortifying and placing troops in Gallipoli. So the British and the Australians land in the face of intense defensive fire. But that's not all. The Australians land at a place called Anzac Cove, which is basically a beach under a cliff. 150 feet of cliff, then you go inland. And the Turks are on top of the cliff. So the Australians are in basically a kill zone for months. Eventually they fight their way up the cliff and back, but it's a real meat grinder. Gallipoli becomes synonymous with wasted youth in Australia. The British, meanwhile, launch a diversionary attack at a place called Suvla Bay. But the British commander, after achieving surprise, which is what the whole operation needed, it needed surprise, after landing, allows his troops to rest and brew tea rather than move aggressively inland. And by the time they're done having their tea break, the Turks are in position and slaughtering them. So the Gallipoli attack is a complete failure. And the result is Churchill is fired from his position running the British Navy because he is blamed for it, even though it wasn't entirely his fault. In any event, okay, so that fails. But there's another plan that's going to have a much better chance of succeeding. I should use green because it's Muslim. Oh, I use green here. So, okay, here's Mecca. Mecca is obviously the holy city of Islam. It's where the Kaaba is. We've talked about Mecca's importance to Islam when we've covered the history of Islam. The Hashemites are a royal family of Arabs who have kept the Hejaz for centuries. The blood of the Prophet Muhammad flows through their veins. The most active Hashemite is the son of their king, a guy named Prince Faisal. So, the British in Cairo decide that what they're going to try to do. See, the Arabs have been a sleepy people, a little people, petty, barbarous, and cruel. They're basically still stuck in the Middle Ages. But what the British are going to do is they're going to infect the Arabs with nationalism. The British Cairo office provide the national colors of Arab nationalism to this day, which is white, black, red, and green. All Arab nationalist flags are made of white, black, red, and green, as if they are the Arab national colors given to them by the British. Yes?
I was wondering if you knew, if you look at Arabian horses, their necks are completely, stocky and long.
Yeah.
Do you know why they're like that?
I don't know why. I'm not a horse guy, but I know this. Every horse person I know respects the Arabians as probably the finest lines of horse flesh on earth. And if you think of the Arabs love their horses.
Yeah.
The Bedou, even though they use camels in the desert, they love their horses. That's beautiful horses. Okay. So the British send a mission to the Hashemites in and around Mecca, encouraging the Hashemites to claim the caliphate. Now, this is because the British see the caliph as something like a Holy Roman Emperor or a Pope. Islam isn't exactly the same as Christianity. It doesn't have strong church structures. It doesn't have a strong legalistic linkage between Islam and the rulers. A lot of it's understood, a lot of it's informal. But what the British are trying to do is get the Hashemites here to claim the caliphate as the descendants of Muhammad and the keepers of Mecca, and create basically an Arab civil war, an Arab revolt against the Turks. Now, I will clarify. The Turks are Turkish. Their bloodline comes from Central Asia. They're Muslims, and they have run the Islamic world for a very long time. The Arabs are from Arabia. They are the original jihadis. They're the people who followed Muhammad and his descendants out of the Arabian Peninsula. Arabs and Turks are different people. Turks are much less iconoclastic than the Arabs. The Arabs don't have any realistic art. The Turks do. The Arabs and Turks don't especially get along very well. But the Arabs have been culturally asleep for hundreds and hundreds of years. Again, going through their lives. Letting the Turks rule. So the British are going to try to change this. And one of the people that they send in 1916 is T.E. Lawrence, who's an eccentric scholar who before World War I had been traveling the Middle East doing research. T.E. Lawrence speaks Arabic perfectly. He understands Arab culture. He understands Islam very, very well. And Lawrence is going to become, well, imagine that the Arab world is a giant reservoir, underground, completely smooth. Lawrence is a stone that is dropped into that reservoir. And soon the entire reservoir will resonate with the waves caused by Lawrence. Please close the shades, shut the curtains, turn the fan off, and close the slats over there. And we're going to watch some excerpts giving you an impression of Arabia and of Lawrence from the movie Lawrence of Arabia.